Nub Beamer's request for positive identification.
He wore a shotgun, not a six-shooter. He solved crimes with his brain, not just his fists. And decades before anyone knew the name, one episode predicted a con man named Trump who promised to build a wall. This is Trackdown, a forgotten Western that launched careers, broke formulas, and somehow saw the future. These are 10 weird facts about Trackdown. And the bonus? Well, let's just say Robert Culp almost turned it down to stay in New York theater. Saddle up. This story rides deeper than you think.
Morning. Shave or haircut?
Neither. I understand you're what passes for the local law on Crater Junction.
That's right.
Before he was a secret agent, any spy, before he faced off against Bill Cosby in tennis matches on screen, Robert Culp was a Texas Ranger with a shotgun. In 1957, Trackdown premiered on CBS, and Culp was cast as Hobie Gilman, a lawman who didn't fit the mold. He wasn't quick on the draw. He didn't swagger through saloons looking for fights. Instead, he investigated crimes, tracked evidence, and used his mind as much as his weapon. It was a radical shift for Westerns at the time. Most shows featured gunslingers, outlaws, and high noon showdowns. But Trackdown? It played like a detective series in cowboy boots. Culp brought a quiet intensity to the role, a cerebral quality that made Hobie feel modern even in the Old West. The show ran for 2 seasons, 71 episodes total, and while it never became a massive hit, it carved out something unusual in the genre. Critics noticed. Audiences who found it, they stayed loyal. And for Culp, it was the role that proved he could carry a series. He was 27 years old, relatively unknown, and suddenly the lead in a primetime Western. It wasn't the biggest show on television, but it was his show, and that made all the difference.
You giving yourself up?
Nope. I can't claim the reward. The Ranger's got $1,000 on his head.
Trackdown didn't come from nowhere. It was created by Vincent Fennelly and produced by 4 Star Productions, one of the most prolific television studios of the 1950s. 4 Star was a powerhouse churning out westerns, dramas, and anthology series at an industrial pace. They had a system, a formula, a machine designed to fill airtime and sell advertising. But even within that machine, Trackdown stood out because it tried something different. Instead of the lone wanderer drifting from town to town, Hobie Gilman was a Texas Ranger with authority, jurisdiction, and a code. He represented law and order in a genre that often romanticized chaos. The show aired on Friday nights, a competitive slot where Westerns battled for attention against variety shows and crime dramas. CBS believed in it enough to give it 2 seasons, but not enough to fight for a third when the ratings plateaued. Still, those 71 episodes became something of a proving ground. Directors learned their craft, writers experimented with structure, and actors, they showed up ready to work because 4 Star didn't tolerate anything less. Trackdown wasn't trying to reinvent television, but it was trying to do something smarter, something grounded, something that respected the audience's intelligence. And for a moment in the late 1950s, it succeeded. The shotgun wasn't just a prop, it was a statement. While most TV cowboys carried Colt .45 revolvers, Hobie Gilman walked into frame with a short-barreled shotgun. It was unusual, unexpected, and it told you everything about the character before he even spoke. A shotgun isn't a dueling weapon. It's not flashy. It's practical, intimidating, and it says, "I'm not here to play games." Culp carried that shotgun like it was part of his body, slung low, ready but not aggressive. And in a genre obsessed with fast draws and spinning pistols, that choice made Trackdown feel grounded in a way other Westerns weren't. The decision came from the producers who wanted Hobie to feel like a real lawman, not a gunslinger. Texas Rangers carried shotguns. They rode long distances. They dealt with outlaws who didn't follow dueling codes. So giving Hobie a shotgun made tactical sense, but it also made dramatic sense. It set him apart. When viewers saw that weapon, they knew this wasn't going to be another shoot-'em-up. This was something different, something closer to the truth of frontier law enforcement. And Culp understood that. He never twirled it, never showed off. He just carried it like a man who knew how to use it and hoped he wouldn't have to.
Nub Beamer's.
Before Trackdown ended, it gave birth to something bigger. In the final episodes of the series, a new character appeared. A bounty hunter named Josh Randall, played by a young actor named Steve McQueen. The character was introduced as a backdoor pilot, a test to see if he could carry his own show. And he could. That character became wanted, dead or alive. one of the most iconic westerns of the late 1950s and early 1960s, and it launched Steve McQueen into stardom. McQueen's appearance on Trackdown was brief, just a handful of episodes, but it was enough. He brought a coiled energy, a dangerous charm, and a presence that jumped off the screen. Producers saw it immediately. Audiences responded, and within months, Wanted, Dead or Alive was on the air, with McQueen as the lead. It's one of the strangest legacies in television, a forgotten show that quietly birthed a legend. Trackdown ended, but Josh Randall kept writing, and while Robert Culp's Hobie Gilman faded into obscurity, Steve McQueen's bounty hunter became the face of a new kind of Western hero. Loner, mercenary, unforgettable. Trackdown didn't just tell its own story, it set the stage for someone else's, and that someone became a movie star. In 1958, Trackdown aired an episode that would become infamous decades later. The episode was called The End of the World, and it featured a con man who rode into a small Texas town claiming that the world was about to be destroyed. He said he was the only one who could save them. He promised to build a wall to protect the town from the coming apocalypse. And his name? Trump. Walter Trump. The character, played by Lawrence Dobkin, was a slick-talking fraudster who manipulated fear, sold false hope, and demanded money from desperate people. Hobie Gilman, of course, exposed him as a liar. The episode aired once, disappeared into the archives, and was forgotten for over 50 years. Then, in 2016, during the US presidential election, someone rediscovered it. Clips went viral, news outlets covered it, social media exploded. How could a 1950s Western predict a con man named Trump who promises to build a wall? Was it prophetic, coincidence, satire from another era? The truth is simpler and stranger. The episode wasn't predicting the future, it was reflecting the past, the age-old con of fear-mongering and false salvation. But the name, the wall, the timing of its rediscovery, all of it felt too surreal to ignore. And suddenly Trackdown wasn't forgotten anymore. It was a meme, a curiosity, a ghost from television history that seemed to have seen something no one else did. Robert Culp didn't want to do television. He was a stage actor, trained in New York, committed to the craft, and he saw TV as a step down. In the mid-1950s, television was still the new kid, the medium that theater actors looked down on and film actors tolerated for a paycheck. Culp was doing serious work off Broadway. He had dreams of becoming a great stage actor, maybe transitioning to prestigious film roles down the line. Then Trackdown came along. The money was good, the role was solid, and his agent pushed him hard. "Take it," they said. "Build your name. You can always go back to theater." Culp hesitated. He read the scripts. He liked Hobie Gilman, the intelligence, the restraint, but he wasn't sure. Finally, he said yes, more out of practicality than passion. And once the cameras started rolling, something shifted. He realized television wasn't just a paycheck. It was a different kind of stage. Intimate, immediate, alive in a way theater couldn't match. He found his rhythm. He made Hobie his own. And while Trackdown only lasted 2 seasons, it taught Culp how to be a television star. Without that show, there's no I Spy, there's no Culp as a household name. Sometimes the roles we almost turn down become the ones that change everything. Trackdown was shot fast. Television in the 1950s didn't have time for endless takes, perfectionism, or second-guessing. 4-star productions ran a tight ship, and directors were expected to deliver episodes on schedule, no excuses. Most episodes were filmed in just a few days, sometimes as quickly as 2 or 3. Actors had to know their lines cold. Camera operators had to hit their marks the first time, and if something went wrong, they fixed it fast and kept moving. Robert Culp later said the pace was brutal but exhilarating. You didn't have time to overthink. You had to trust your instincts, make bold choices, and commit. That urgency shows in the performances. There's a rawness to Trackdown that more polished shows lack. Scenes feel unrehearsed, alive, like anything could happen. And sometimes, things did go wrong. Props broke. Actors forgot lines. Horses didn't cooperate. But the crew learned to roll with it, adapt, improvise. That scrappy energy became part of the show's identity. It wasn't the slickest Western on TV, but it had grit. It had momentum. And in a genre crowded with formulaic shootouts and saloon brawls, Trackdown's rough edges made it feel real. Fast doesn't always mean cheap. Sometimes it just means alive. The show had a unique structure that set it apart from other Westerns. While most shows followed a simple pattern, villain shows up, hero confronts villain, shootout, resolution, Trackdown operated more like a crime procedural. Hobie Gilman would arrive in a town, investigate a crime, interview witnesses, gather evidence, and piece together what happened. There were still gunfights, but they weren't the climax of every episode. Sometimes the resolution came through dialogue, deduction, or a moral reckoning. This structure was rare for westerns in the 1950s, and it made Trackdown feel ahead of its time. It anticipated the modern forensic drama by decades, proving that you could tell compelling stories without relying on action alone. Critics appreciated the approach. Some called it the thinking person's western. Others said it was too slow, too talky, not exciting enough. But for viewers who wanted something more than just gunfights and horseback chases, Trackdown delivered. It respected their intelligence. It asked them to pay attention, to follow the clues, to think alongside Hobie Gilman. And while that approach may have limited its mass appeal, it also gave the show a distinctive voice. In a sea of sameness, Trackdown stood apart, not because it was louder, but because it was smarter. Trackdown had a remarkable roster of guest stars who would go on to become major names in Hollywood. The show served as a training ground, a place where young actors could cut their teeth before landing bigger roles. Michael Landon appeared in an episode before becoming a star on Bonanza and Little House on the Prairie. Charles Bronson showed up, playing a villain with the same quiet menace that would define his later career. DeForest Kelley, who would become Dr. McCoy on Star Trek, had a memorable role. Even Vic Morrow, before combat made him famous, appeared in Trackdown's gritty world. These weren't just small cameos. They were substantial roles that gave these actors a chance to show what they could do. And the directors noticed. Casting agents noticed. Suddenly, these guest appearances became calling cards. Four-star productions had a knack for spotting talent early, and Trackdown became one of their proving grounds. It's one of those strange footnotes in TV history, a show that wasn't a massive hit, but somehow launched or boosted the careers of people who would become legends. If you go back and watch Trackdown now, you'll see faces that became iconic in other roles, younger, hungrier, finding their voices in the dusty streets of a forgotten Western. When Trackdown ended in 1959, it didn't go out with fanfare. There was no final episode event, no big send-off, no closure for fans. CBS simply didn't renew it, and that was that. The show had decent ratings, but not great ones. It had critical respect, but not awards. And in the brutal economics of 1950s television, that meant cancellation. Robert Culp moved on quickly, landing roles in other shows, eventually starring in I Spy and becoming a household name. But Trackdown? It disappeared. For decades, it lived in the archives, rarely rerun, barely remembered outside of TV history books and Western enthusiasts. No DVD release came until much later. No streaming platform picked it up. It became one of those shows that existed more as a footnote than as a living piece of culture. And yet, it mattered. It showed that Westerns could be more than shootouts and saloons. It proved Robert Culp could carry a series. It launched Steve McQueen's TV career. And it told stories that, even now, feel surprisingly modern. Trackdown may not have lasted long, but it left fingerprints all over what came after. Sometimes the shows that don't survive are the ones that pave the way for everything else. And Trackdown? It rode hard, rode smart, and then rode off into the sunset before anyone realized what they'd lost. The theme music for Trackdown was simple, memorable, and built tension before a single frame appeared. Composed by Herschel Burke Gilbert, a prolific TV composer who scored dozens of shows in the 1950s and 60s, the Trackdown theme had a driving rhythm that captured the relentless nature of pursuit. It wasn't a sweeping orchestral piece like some prestige westerns used. It was lean, percussive, almost minimalist. Drums pounded, guitars twanged, and underneath it all, a low rumble suggested danger on the horizon. Gilbert understood that television themes had to work fast. You had maybe 30 seconds to set the tone, establish the mood, and hook the viewer before the episode started. And Trackdown's theme did exactly that. It felt urgent, purposeful, like Hobie Gilman himself, a man always moving forward, always closing in. Gilbert would go on to score other classic shows, but Trackdown's theme remains one of his most effective pieces of work. It's been largely forgotten by mainstream audiences, but for those who remember the show, that music brings it all back instantly. The dusty trails, the shotgun, the quiet determination. Music has power like that, the ability to transport you back to a moment, a feeling, a world that no longer exists except in memory and archived reels. CBS scheduled Trackdown on Friday nights at 8:30 p.m., a slot that seemed promising but turned out to be a battleground. The show was up against stiff competition, variety shows, quiz programs, and other westerns, all fighting for the same audience. In 1957 and 1958, television was exploding. More households had sets, more networks were investing in original programming, and Fridays were prime real estate. Families gathered, advertisers paid premium rates, and shows lived or died based on those Nielsen numbers. Trackdown performed respectably, but never quite broke through to become a top 10 hit. It found its audience, loyal viewers who tuned in every week, but it couldn't expand beyond that core. Part of the problem was the show's tone. It was quieter, more cerebral than other westerns, which meant it appealed to a specific demographic but didn't have the broad appeal networks craved. CBS gave it 2 seasons, a fair shot by 1950s standards. But when renewal time came, they looked at the numbers and decided to move on. The slot would eventually go to other shows, other experiments, other attempts to capture lightning in a bottle. Trackdown had its moment, but in the ruthless calculus of network television, moments don't last unless they deliver ratings. Robert Culp did most of his own stunts, not because the show couldn't afford stunt doubles, they had them, but because Culp was young, athletic, and determined to make Hobie Gilman feel authentic. He rode horses hard, he threw punches, he dove through windows and rolled in the dirt. And while stunt coordinators were on set to handle the dangerous work, Culp often insisted on doing scenes himself if he thought he could pull them off. It was partly ego, the pride of a young actor proving himself, but it was also craft. Culp understood that the camera catches everything. If a stunt double's build is slightly different, if their movement doesn't match, the audience feels it even if they can't articulate why. So Culp learned to ride well, trained with the weapons, and took his share of bruises. Years later, when he worked on I Spy, that same commitment to physical performance became part of his trademark. He and Bill Cosby did their own fight choreography, improvised action sequences, and brought a kinetic energy to the show that felt fresh. But it all started with Trackdown, with a young actor on a low-budget western deciding that if he was going to play a Texas Ranger, he was going to do it for real. The scripts for Trackdown often dealt with surprisingly dark subject matter for 1950s television. While many westerns kept things simple, good versus evil, white hats and black hats, Trackdown explored moral ambiguity. Episodes dealt with revenge, corruption, prejudice, and the cost of justice. One episode featured a town turning on an innocent man because of rumors and fear. Another showed Hobie wrestling with whether to enforce a law he personally disagreed with. These weren't groundbreaking by modern standards, but for 1950s network television, they pushed boundaries. The production code was still in effect, censoring content, and networks were cautious about anything controversial. But Trackdown's writers found ways to smuggle in complexity, to ask questions without providing easy answers. They understood that the Western genre, at its best, was about more than shootouts. It was about civilization emerging from chaos, about what laws mean and who enforces them, about justice versus revenge. And while they couldn't get too explicit, couldn't push too hard without network interference, they managed to create episodes that lingered, that made viewers think. Not every episode succeeded, but enough did that Trackdown developed a reputation as a smarter Western, one worth paying attention to if you wanted more than just entertainment. Behind the scenes, tensions occasionally flared between the creative team and the network. CBS wanted action, excitement, clear resolutions. They worried that Trackdown was too slow, too talky, not visceral enough. Notes came down from executives suggesting more gunfights, more chases, more moments that would make audiences sit up and pay attention. The producers pushed back when they could, arguing that Hobie Gilman wasn't that kind of character, that the show's identity depended on its restraint. But they also had to compromise. Some episodes were rewritten to include more action. Scenes were added or extended to satisfy network demands. It was the eternal battle of the 1950s television, art versus commerce, vision versus ratings. And Trackdown, like most shows, lived in the middle, fighting for its identity while also trying to survive. Robert Culp later spoke about those tensions, how frustrating it was to build something unique only to have executives demand you make it more like everything else. But he also understood the reality. Television was a business. Shows needed sponsors. Sponsors needed viewers. And if you couldn't deliver, you were gone. Trackdown managed to maintain much of its distinctive voice despite the pressure, but you can see the compromises in certain episodes, as in moments that feel off, that don't quite fit the show's tone. The show's cinematography was surprisingly sophisticated for a low-budget Western. Director of photography William Margulies, who worked on multiple episodes, brought a noir sensibility to the dusty frontier. He used shadows, silhouettes, and dramatic lighting to create mood and tension. Scenes weren't just lit for clarity, they were lit for emotion. A confrontation in a saloon might play out half in shadow, faces obscured, danger lurking in every corner. A sunrise conversation could be shot into the light, creating a halo effect that suggested hope or new beginnings. This wasn't standard practice for Westerns at the time. Most were shot bright and flat, prioritizing visibility over artistry. But Trackdown's cinematographers understood that television, despite its small screen and limited resolution, could still be beautiful. They couldn't match the sweep of widescreen Westerns in theaters, but they could use light and composition to create something striking within their constraints. And when you watch Trackdown now, that craftsmanship still shows. The images have texture, they feel considered. It's one of the reasons the show aged better than some of its contemporaries. Technical excellence transcends trends, and Trackdown's visual quality gave it a timelessness that pure spectacle never achieves. Teen 4-Star Productions was known for recycling sets, props, and even entire storylines across their various shows. Trackdown was no exception. A saloon that appeared in one episode might show up in The Rifleman the next week. A costume worn by a Trackdown villain could turn up on a different character in another 4-star production. Even scripts were sometimes repurposed, basic plots tweaked and rewritten to fit different shows and characters. This wasn't lazy filmmaking, it was survival. Television production in the 1950s operated on razor-thin budgets and impossible schedules. Studios couldn't afford to build new sets for every episode or create unique costumes for every character, so they reused, recycled, and reimagined. What's remarkable is how well it worked. Audiences generally didn't notice, or if they did, they didn't care. They were watching for the stories and the characters, not cataloging which saloon appeared in which show. And the creative teams became masters at making the familiar feel fresh. A slight camera angle change, different lighting, new dialogue, and suddenly the same location told a completely different story. Trackdown benefited from this system, drawing on 4-Star's extensive resources while also contributing to the shared pool. It was television as assembly line, efficient and effective, even if it lacked the prestige of more expensive productions. When Trackdown ended, Robert Culp faced an uncertain future. He was 29 years old, had 2 seasons of television under his belt, but was hardly a household name. For a few years, he bounced between guest roles on other shows, small parts in films, stage work when he could get it. He was working, but he wasn't breaking through. Then, in 1965, everything changed. He was cast alongside Bill Cosby in I Spy, a groundbreaking series that made Cosby the first black actor to star in a dramatic series. Culp played Kelly Robinson, a spy posing as a tennis player, and the chemistry between him and Cosby was electric. The show became a hit, won Emmys, and turned both actors into stars. But Culp always credited Trackdown as his foundation. It taught him how to carry a series, how to make a character his own, how to work within the constraints of television production. Without those 71 episodes playing Hobby Gilman, he might not have been ready for I Spy. Success rarely arrives in a straight line. More often, it's built on a series of smaller achievements, roles that teach you, failures that strengthen you, shows that nobody remembers preparing you for the one that changes everything. Trackdown was Culp's preparation, his training ground, his first real proving ground. Decades after Trackdown ended, it found new life in the most unexpected way, through internet nostalgia and viral clips. The Trump episode, rediscovered in 2016, brought sudden attention to a show that had been forgotten by mainstream culture. Suddenly, people were seeking out Trackdown episodes, trying to find where they could watch the series, discussing it on social media. Some streaming services added it to their catalogs. DVD collections were produced for the first time. And a whole new generation discovered Hobie Gilman, Robert Culp, and a Western that felt surprisingly modern despite its age. The renewed interest was fleeting. a momentary spike driven by political curiosity more than genuine appreciation for the show itself. But for those few months, Trackdown was relevant again. TV historians wrote articles, YouTube channels did retrospectives, and somewhere in the great archive of forgotten television, a 1950s Western got one more moment in the spotlight. It's a strange way for a show to be remembered, not for its quality or innovation, but for an accidental prediction that wasn't really a prediction at all. But legacy takes many forms, and sometimes being remembered for the wrong reasons is better than being forgotten entirely. Trackdown got its second act, however brief, and proved that nothing truly dies in the internet age. In the end, Trackdown's legacy isn't in ratings or awards. It's in the things it made possible. It proved that Westerns could be more than action spectacles. It showed that television could handle complex, character-driven storytelling even within the constraints of network standards and tight budgets. It gave Robert Culp his first leading role and launched Steve McQueen toward stardom. It experimented with structure, tone, and visual style in ways that influenced the shows that came after. And it told 71 stories about justice, morality, and the cost of doing what's right in a world that doesn't always reward righteousness. Most shows don't change television. They don't rewrite the rules or revolutionize the medium. They just do their work, tell their stories, and fade away. But sometimes, if they're lucky, they leave something behind, an influence, an idea, a template that others can build on. Trackdown did that. It showed future creators that there was room in the Western genre for intelligence and restraint. And while it never became a classic, while most people have never heard of it, it earned its place in the history of television. Not at the top, but there nonetheless, remembered by those who know where to look. After Trackdown wrapped, the shotgun that Robert Culp carried throughout the series disappeared. Not stolen, not destroyed, just lost in the shuffle of production wrap-up and prop storage. 4-star Productions had warehouses full of weapons, costumes, and set pieces. And somewhere in that chaos, Hobie Gilman's iconic shotgun vanished. Years later, in an interview, Culp mentioned that he'd always wanted to keep it as a souvenir, a piece of the show that launched his television career. He'd asked about buying it after filming ended, but by then nobody could find it. Production assistants searched the prop department. Nothing. It had simply ceased to exist, absorbed into the vast machinery of 1950s television production where everything was recycled, repurposed, or discarded. Some fans speculate it showed up in other 4-star shows, carried by different actors and different stories. Others believe it's still sitting in someone's garage or attic, an unmarked relic with no provenance, its history unknown even to whoever owns it. But Culp never saw it again. And in a way that feels appropriate. Trackdown itself disappeared for decades, lost in the archives, forgotten by most. Why shouldn't the shotgun follow the same path, vanishing into television history, waiting for someone to rediscover it and recognize what it once meant?